Let's testify on that. Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord. But you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. I will tell the word of the hope I have found. For my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, do you believe it? Has he done it for anyone else? I said, has he done it for anyone else? Cause the God that I serve, he's always at work. Has he done it for anyone else? So come on and testify of the power of God. Come on and tell the world of the hope we have found. For our body was broken, our hearts were made whole, and that's too good to keep to yourself. Come on and testify of the power of God. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify your voice. This is my. So I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify. Come on, take it up. Jesus, my champion, the victor of grace, the only one worthy of all of my praise. Yeah. So come on and testify. Oh, somebody lift him high. Come on, testify the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh, for my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Sing that. Oh, my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right now, Murfreesboro.
Hey guys, so good to see you. Street Preacher, I'm looking at that video. I don't know what church that is, but I've seen stuff like that from some of these mega churches. And yeah, it's quite frankly, like it's kind of funny because at first when you were talking about is this how mega churches keep people in the seats with the lighting and stuff, I thought you were talking about what was playing on my stream with Kyle and the gang singing "Testify," and I was all set to be all defensive about it and say, well, actually, that's a special event, not where it's not a church service. and blah blah blah. But then, it's funny because Corey, pastor at our church, he has frequently said that how the way he always describes it is that these mega churches will have helicopters with the Easter bunny throwing iPads into the crowd in order to get people to come to church, but they're not actually talking about the gospel. And I think that is a real problem. And yes, I've seen this picture before. I got a picture from Mr. Know It All of Kirk and Spock wearing ugly Christmas sweaters. But anyway, yeah, and that kind of thing, where these churches put on a huge spectacle in order to try to get people to come to the church, but they're not actually. I mean, like I'm sorry, but elves on trapezes in bubbles flying out over the audience. How is that teaching people about the good news? You know, I assume every worship service isn't a spectacle. Well, okay, so as far as our church is concerned, the song "Testify" that you saw Kyle singing, they sing that occasionally. It's in the rotation for songs that they do at our regular worship services. And the performance of the song is identical. I mean, depending, it might not be Kyle singing, it might be somebody else, but it's the same song and the same instrumentals most of the time. Every once in a while, they do what they call simple worship, where it's all acoustic. But but we don't have like the fancy lighting and stuff like we have at the big worship nights events. That's about the only thing that's different, you know, between our church service and the worship nights. This would be like free Cirque du Soleil. Yeah, it does seem like that. It's like they needed big buildings to hold large crowds, not put on a free Vegas show every week. Yeah, if I don't know, yeah, what that is, but yeah, it certainly isn't church. Ugly sweaters, yes, but they don't have smoke machines and laser light shows. Well, that's true. Well, at our worship services, the regular worship service, but at our worship nights, I should say, when we do, which we do two a year, those big concert type venues, they do frequently have smoke machines. So I will say that. And street preachers saying unplugged. Yes, what they do. Well, it is like Kyle just calls it simplified worship, but what he'll usually do is like after the spring worship night is when he usually does this, where he'll spend like 1 week. It'll just be Kyle playing a acoustic piano, and that's it. And then maybe the next week it'll be Kyle playing the acoustic piano and Mitch playing an acoustic guitar. And then basically after 4 weeks or so of that, then we get back to the regular stuff. Josiah says, nice shirt. Well, this is actually a robe, but yeah, and the wife got it for me. I was just trying it on, since it's wintertime, to be able to put on an extra layer rather than spend extra money on keeping the heat on all the time. Speaking of which, I'm going to turn this off. Turn it on a little bit just to keep praying from freezing. I think Christmas pageants are fine as long as they work in the story and message of Christ. For the most part, yeah. I mean, I don't know what the context of this is. So if this is actually supposed to be a Christmas Advent type service thing, then I think that it is a bit over the top to have elves on trapezes doing flips over the audience with bubble machines. But maybe it's kind of, for all we know, they're doing a whole thing about the commercialization of Christmas, So that it could be, don't know. Christianity Unplugged, yes. They used to always do that to a living Christmas tree show. I used to perform at when my violin. Yeah, living Christmas tree used to be quite a tradition in a lot of places. And, they would usually finish it with the Hallelujah chorus that, of course, the audience would get in on singing as well. But yeah, those kind of things can be fun. But, and that is, simply for, singing Christmas hymns and stuff. And some people, like people would debate about whether or not that's okay or not. I think it's fine as long as it's not meant to replace, your regular church service. The concerts are different, yes. This is a sad chapter. Some people say that if a man is emasculated in some way, he can't go to heaven, and that's what this means, which is ridiculous. I'm not sure exactly which verse you're talking about because I didn't read ahead today, but when we get to it, hopefully I'll know, and if not, then you'll have to put in a comment as to which verse specifically you are referring to. Let's see, make sure there's nothing. Okay, ones and. I don't know. Is this? Okay, he sent Mr. Know-It-All sent me a commercial for the Star Trek Happy Meal. His smoking jacket, yes, but I don't smoke. Hefner vibes. Well, I am, way cooler than Hugh Hefner. Do you know how to do the Daffy laugh? No. He'll be in the grotto later. Yeah, that ain't gonna happen. I'm in Mexico. It's warm here. Well, it's not warm here. Yeah, it's just on a random post that came up my X feed. Hadn't really researched it. Yeah. Like I said, those kinds of things, I'd have to watch the entire show to make an honest judgment of it. Star Trek Happy Meal for a cat. No, it's an old commercial. Remember, Star Trek the Motion Picture was, and this is actually true. Star Trek the Motion Picture was the first movie Happy Meal tie-in, and so and I had a few of those when I was a kid. Did young Michael like to party? Never did. Not because I didn't like to, but I was a nerd. I was never invited, so I never once, when I was a young man, went to a party. So other than like when I was a little kid, the occasional birthday party kind of thing, but not like a party where kids are, listening to loud music and you know doing bad things. I've never been to a party like that. Um, Hashtag salty for bring back Kurtzman. Yeah, that Trek reviewer. When I saw that first thing you said about me doing a rewatch of all the Kurtzman Trek, I'll be happy to rewatch Strange New Worlds, but and Lower Decks. But any other Kurtzman Trek, thanks, but no thanks. Unless you're paying me per episode, in which case we'll negotiate. What was the toy? That's the funny thing, is that the toy was nothing. The whole, it was just the box. So the toy back then for the Happy Meal, like nowadays, you get these little plastic toys that are usually some replica of something from the movie or whatever. Back then, the toy was like a little plastic oven mitt looking glove that would have like the face of Grimace on it. I mean, it was just, yeah, really bad. Yeah, Happy Meal toy for the Star. I don't think. Well, I could be wrong, but I don't remember. I remember the box, but I don't think there was a Star Trek toy. A Star Trek toy in the TMP Happy Meal. Let's see. Oh, okay, so it had rings, insignias and iron-on. That's right. I remember the iron-ons. I got so yeah. I don't remember the rings. I remember the iron-ons. Now that it mentioned it, and I don't remember the insignias. But it's been a long time since that was 1979. So yeah. Johnny Knoxville versus Jack Tripper. Well, Jack Tripper is a nicer guy, but Johnny Knoxville has taken a lot worse punishment, so I would give it to him. Still have my Burger King Krug collector's glass from Star Trek 3. Wow, cool. So he probably played with the Wonder Wheel. I don't know what the Wonder Wheel is. Too bad no little Enterprise keychain or anything. That would have been cool. Like remember the in the original series in Cat's Paw when they trapped the Enterprise on a little keychain, or not a keychain, but like a little necklace type thing. Man, I would have loved to have had that. What's the funniest version of the Joker? Probably Caesar Romero. Do your best clown impression. Hey, hey, hey! Robert says, hello, how you doing? What, not shalom? I'm shocked, but shalom, shalom, Robert. Didn't they do a Star Trek Toys for Happy Meals for 2009? I don't know. I don't remember. Barney Fife versus Mr. Feely. That's an interesting one, except that you see, yeah. Now, Mr. Feely is, if I remember correctly, he's from Mr. Or Mr. Furley, I mean, was from Three's Company, and Barney Fife, of course, from the Andy Griffith Show. Now, you would think that it would be a toss-up because they're both Don Knotts, but while he only has one bullet and he keeps it in his pocket, Barney Fife does indeed have a gun. So he wins. Definitely Caesar. He put the white paint right over his mustache. Yeah, because he was, that's that's what they should have done with the Justice League, is just put some flesh makeup over the mustache and just pretended it wasn't there. It would have looked better than that stupid CGI lip. Yeah, he refused to shave for the part. Now, in Henry Cavill's defense, it was because Tom Cruise wouldn't let him shave for the reshoots, which was really, really lame. All right, so today we are doing Leviticus chapter 21. We've been going through a lot of rules and regulations in Leviticus. Last time we did the various punishments for sins. This time we're doing specifically rules that apply to priests. Something to think about a little bit when we think about, while and something to remember about Leviticus. The Levitican law are we bound by it as Christians? No, that's fairly clear. But Paul does write multiple times about the fact that we learn about sin through the law. So the law doesn't make us righteous, which is one of the reasons that it's not binding anymore. But we do learn about sin through the law. Now, of course, not every law is about sin, so that's something that requires a little discernment. Some of the law, which we've talked about quite a bit, is like health code regulations, food safety, stuff like that. But then some of it is straight up morality, and that's when we get into sin type stuff. Most notably is sexual immorality. And why is that the most notable? Is it because sexual immorality is worse than any other sin? No, it's because it's so insidious. It is, it's probably the trap that more people, especially men, fall into, and not only fall into, but then try to justify. They'll say, "Oh well, I'm not really doing anything wrong," because like it used to be a thing where prostitution was not considered all that bad, right? Why? Because if you slept with a prostitute, the prostitute committed adultery, but you didn't, because assuming she wasn't married, right? So because nobody would be married to a prostitute. So that's how the one way that people would get around to try and justify a sin, because they would say, "I'm not committing adultery because she's not married." Well, you're kind of missing the point of some of this stuff, right? And with sexual sin, we tend to do it more than with pretty much anything else. But this time we're talking about priests specifically. So let's switch on over. And we'll put it up here. So, Leviticus chapter 21, rules for priests, starting at verse number 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, a priest must not make himself ceremonially unclean for any of his people who die, except for a close relative, such as his mother or father, his son or daughter, his brother, or an unmarried sister who is dependent on him since she has no husband. For her, he may make himself unclean. He must not make himself unclean for people related to him by marriage, and so defile himself." So remember that what it's talking about, and you might think, "Ew, they're talking about necrophilia," or something. Obviously, when we talked about some of the clean, unclean ceremonial laws, a lot of it had to do, like, you couldn't touch a corpse, right? And so what it's saying here is that a priest specifically, like, so a person who, and the ceremonial laws are different than the moral laws. So ceremonial law, you touch a corpse, you're now ceremonially unclean. So you have to go through some sort of cleansing ritual to become clean again. However, in the case, and so it was basically okay. So you had someone die. Their body has to be dealt with, right? You have to get it outside of the camp because you don't want disease to spread and that kind of thing. But so obviously you didn't just let the body rot wherever they died, but whoever handled the body was ceremonially unclean when they did, and then they had to go through the cleansing ritual in order to be clean again. The priest, however, was held to a different standard. So the priest was never to touch a corpse unless it was a family member, and of course it makes a specific exception of an unmarried sister, because an unmarried sister would, if she was married, then it would be her husband's duty to take care of the body. But if she's unmarried, meaning she's either a widow or single, then and she doesn't have anybody, else to take care of it, you do it. And of course, if one of your parents dies or whatever, it's perfectly acceptable for you to take care of the final preparations, so to speak. However, you would then still have to go through the cleansing ritual and everything before you could enter into the courtyard, the inner courts, and all that stuff. But if Joe Schmo dies, and that person is not blood relative to you, then you, under no circumstances, as a priest, was allowed to touch that body. All right. Priests must not shave their heads or shave off the edges of their beard or cut their bodies. They must be holy to their God and must not profane the name of their God, because they present food offerings to the Lord, the food of their God. They are to be holy. So it's interesting. So so a priest cannot shave their head. A priest cannot cut the edges off their beards. This is why so many Orthodox Jews, you'll see, have those curly things on the sides of their head, because they're trying to show off that they've never shaved the sides of their beard. And, one of the things that Jesus talked about is, if you're doing it to show it off, you're not doing it for the right reason. But then and it says they must they must not shave off the edge of their beards or cut their bodies. And so notice, like when we saw the other regulations, it said you couldn't get tattoos or cut yourself for the dead. But here it says priests can't cut their bodies, period. And another thing, like the funny thing is that like all these Orthodox Jews that do the curly Q things and like to think of themselves as extremely righteous because they present themselves the way that this is describing, unless they are Levites, it doesn't even apply to them. But, whatever. Because this is specifically talking about priests, and priests are specifically the direct descendants of Aaron and no one else. With the exception of, well, there's two exceptions, Melchizedek and Christ. And Melchizedek is a whole other topic. Right. They must not marry a woman defiled by prostitution or divorced from their husbands, because priests are holy to their God. So notice here, so the prostitution side. So there's no regulation against a person who is not a priest from marrying a woman who is a former prostitute. Now, keep in mind, if she's a prostitute while she's married, that would be a whole different thing, because that would mean that anybody that's paying her for her services is committing adultery, which is, very serious. But priests are not, they're supposed to keep to a higher standard. And so this is, again, it's showing you, if you look at the way that Paul was talking about the law, it's showing you where, it's, as a woman, it is better to have not been a prostitute, right? So ladies, if you're out there, sorry, the Bible says don't be a prostitute. It's also, notice, or divorced from their husbands. So while divorce is allowable under the rules of the Old Testament, it is clearly considered a negative thing, because a priest cannot marry a divorced woman, even though it's perfectly legal for a woman to be divorced. And, it's kind of interesting that Christ doubles down on that, suggesting that if a woman or a man divorces their spouse for any reason other than infidelity, then if they remarry, they're committing adultery. But in this particular case, it's kind of suggesting, so there's, even though divorce may be allowed, it's not good. And this kind of goes back to one of the conversations that we have over and over and over, especially with non-believers, about, for example, the Bible advocates for slavery. Why? Because there's regulations about slavery in the Bible. However, there's regulations about divorce in the Bible, and the Bible clearly does not advocate for divorce. And so people, they kind of miss that, and they want to suggest that just because something is it has laws or rules about it, that somehow that means it's endorsed. But notice, so they cannot marry women defiled by prostitution or divorced from their husbands, because priests are to be holy to their God. So they are not holy, set apart, if they indulge in either of these things. Now, is it, so it's not illegal to marry a woman who is a former prostitute or is divorced, but it's not holy. Regard them as holy because they offer up the the food to your God. Consider them holy, because I, the Lord, am holy, I who make you holy. If a priest's daughter defiles herself by becoming a prostitute, she disgraces her father. She must be burned by fire. So notice, I mean, that's pretty severe, but yeah, so if you are a priest's daughter and you do that, then that is a capital offense to be a prostitute. So yeah, preachers' kids that go wild, bad idea. The high priest, the one among his brothers who has had the anointing oil poured on his head and who has been ordained to wear the priestly garments, must not let his hair become unkempt or tear his clothes. Now, remember, tearing clothes was a traditional thing that was common, and priests would do this, but it's saying specifically that the high priest cannot. And tearing your clothes is something you would do to express extreme anguish or outrage, and that's why the priest tore his.
Filter with water and make sure
Yeah,
that it's
yeah,
dry
yeah,
before
yeah,
putting
yeah,
it
yeah,
back in the machine for your CPAP.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You need to change the time of that. All right. The like in when on the trial of Jesus, when they ask Jesus if he is the Messiah, and Jesus answers in the affirmative, the priest tears his robe. So, and I don't think it was the high priest, but it might have been, in which case he would have been in violation of this particular law. He must not enter the place where there is a dead body. He must not make himself unclean, even for his father or mother, nor leave the sanctuary of his God or desecrate it, because he has been dedicated by the anointing oil of his God. I am the Lord. So the high priest has even higher standards than the priests, right? So the priest can only deal with dead bodies if it's a close family member. The high priest can't even do that. The woman he marries must be a virgin. So these are rules again for the high priest. So high priest must marry a virgin. He must not marry a widow, a divorced woman, or a woman defiled by prostitution, but only a virgin from his own people. His own people would mean a fellow Levite. And that is so that basically that the Levites at this point, the genetic pool of the chosen people of the priesthood, would not intermix with the other tribes. Remember, holy means set apart. So the Levite tribe would not, marry outside of the Levite tribe. So they will not defile his offspring among his people. I am the Lord who makes him holy. The Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, for the generations to come, none of your descendants who has any defect, and this is, I think this is what was being talked about earlier. So no man who has any defect may come near, no man who is blind or lame, disfigured or deformed, no man who is crippled foot or hand, who is a hunchback or a dwarf, who has an eye defect, who has festering or running sores or damaged testicles. That's a good one. No descendant of Aaron, the priest, who has any defect, is to come near to present the food offerings to the Lord. If he has a defect, he must not come near to offer the food of his God. Now notice, he may eat the most holy food of his God as well as the holy food. Yet because of his defect, he must not go near the curtain or approach the altar and so desecrate my sanctuary. I am the Lord who makes them holy. So Moses told this to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelites. So going back to what was said, let me see if I can find it without losing my place too bad. Oh, here we go. Okay. Some people say that if a man is emasculated in some way, he can't go to heaven, and that's what this means, which is ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous, because if you read that passage, it is painfully obvious what it's talking about and what it's symbolic of, and yet people, and this is one of those things that gets me so mad. So people say, you see, God hates people who have defects. God hates dwarves. God hates blind people and all that, right? And first of all, no, nothing in here doesn't say that God hates these people, right? What it's saying is that for a priest to bring the sacrifice, they must be free of defect. What is the sacrifice? Go back to when we were reading about the animal sacrifices. A lamb without blemish or defect, a goat without blemish or defect, a bull without blemish or defect, right? It's all, and this is all pointing to the future of Christ, who is the sacrificial lamb for us all. And so the whole thing about not having any blemish or defect is not because God hates Peter Dinklage. It's because that it's symbolic of showing that that the ultimate sacrifice is to be made by a perfect person, and thus your sacrifice to God must be perfect and without blemish. And as such, the person presenting the sacrifice must be perfect and without blemish. This is no more a statement saying that God hates Peter Dinklage than God hates lamb chops, because he says that the sacrificial lamb must be perfect and without defect. Because it's perfectly okay for the Hebrews to eat lambs that have defects, as far as, obviously if it was sick or something, you probably wouldn't. But, if a lamb had spots or blemishes on it, on its wool, that doesn't mean you can't eat it. It just means that it's not appropriate as a ritual sacrifice. And so I think a lot of people really miss that. But yeah. Now, let me see if I can find where I was in the chat. Da da da. Okay, no, I didn't read that. Okay. So I think I'm somewhere around there. All right, so let me switch back. All right, so now we'll do the chat for a little while, at least until the wife comes home, and then we'll call it a night. Oh, by the way, also a little housekeeping thing. I'm seriously thinking about switching, and I know some people are going to be mad, but switching this to mornings, because I might be able to do more than one a week if I can do mornings as opposed to evenings. So I may give it a trial run, maybe after we finish Leviticus. I might do it before, just to maybe do a random group of streams during the morning and see if anybody shows up, because I hate only doing one a week. But anyway, so Josiah asked, someone with a bat versus someone with a truck. Really? I mean, I suppose if the person wasn't in the truck, the person with the bat could win, but assuming that the person is in their truck, yeah, that's no contest. Most of it is closely derived from the Ten Commandments. You're talking about the various laws. You're right. Almost every law in Leviticus can be traced back to one of the Ten Commandments. So let's see. Well, I'll find out afterwards. Or a Christian is not bound by the Ten Commandments? That's an interesting question. There are people that will say, well, Christians are not bound by the law except for the Ten Commandments. To which I say, really? Show me where it says that in the Bible. because I I don't see it. Now, maybe I'm because I don't claim to be a biblical scholar. I don't claim to know every jot and tittle of the entire Bible as far as what's there. So maybe it is there, but I don't think it's there. I would say this: the law is not the point. And I think that that's one of the things that Jesus kept trying to drive home to people. He's not so much interested in whether or not you have a checklist of obeying the rule book. He cares more about where your heart's at. And the honest truth is that if your heart is in the right place, then you probably know, when you're doing something bad. And if you can't figure it out, well, one little guide that you can use is if in any way, shape, or form you need to justify it, it's probably not something you should be doing. Now, the thing is that then you have your strong Christian, weak Christian stuff that Paul talks about. So, for example, I like, science fiction, fantasy, superhero movies, right? Now, you'll notice, like right here, there's a mask of Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom is a terrible, evil person bent on world conquering and all that, right? So there are some people that would say, ooh, I can't watch a movie that has Doctor Doom in it because Doctor Doom is evil, right? Now, am I going to say that that person should, in fact, watch a movie with Doctor Doom in it? Absolutely not. Because if that is a stumbling block for that person, then they should avoid it. However, and the flip side of that is that if another Christian is perfectly comfortable watching a movie with Dr. Doom in it, and it doesn't cause them to stumble, then that is fine as well. And the only time, as one Christian to another, that we need to call each other out, it's not because, hey, you like The Godfather, right? And I don't. Like, to me personally, I can't watch a movie like The Godfather, right? I don't like movies that glorify, crime or evil or whatever. And that's, but somebody else thinks, oh, Godfather's the greatest movie of all time. You know what? If you love The Godfather, that's okay. I'm not mad at you for it, right? And we need to offer grace to people that might have differing tastes than us. However, if someone is doing something that we know is a sin, so if somebody is, committing adultery, or and there are certain things that you could argue, okay, maybe it's okay to watch The Godfather or The Fantastic Four, but it's not okay to watch porn, right? That's different. And so, why? Because Christ specifically talks about looking upon other people with lust. And that is the entire purpose of pornography. So, and I got to tell you, that's one of the things I don't like about some movies. Like, I'm not a prude. I'll go see an R-rated movie without even thinking twice about it. However, when I see a movie like Terminator, I love the movie Terminator, except for that stupid sex scene midway through the movie with Kyle and Sarah Connor. I think that it is overtly graphic and gratuitous, and it could have been implied. Uh, you know, it it was not necessary to show all that, and I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable. Now, does that mean I'll never watch The Terminator again? No, I'll probably see it again sometime before I die. It's a great movie, but that particular scene, don't like it, and I never will. And it's the same thing, when the wife and I go to see a movie at the theater, and all of a sudden they decide, it's one, a couple of people are kissing or whatever, okay, whatever. And then the next thing you know, they're ripping each other's clothes off and they want to show as much as they can get away with, right? And, or at least as much as they could convince the actors to let them do. And at that point, I'm like, really? Do we really need to see all this? Is this necessary for the story? To which it almost always isn't. So, there are rare times when it is necessary for the story, and that's different. But if it's not necessary for the telling the story, if it's generally, that means they're doing it just to tantalize people, and that is, not a good thing. Now, the thing about the Ten Commandments, I think, and people get hung up on the Ten Commandments in particular, but the thing about the law in general is, as Paul says, the law is a good way to gauge what you should and shouldn't be doing. It doesn't mean that you have to go through some cleansing ritual or whatever if you break one of these things, but it does mean that you should be trying to repent of anything that you do that you know is sinful. And as far as Christian behavior, remember in the book of Acts, they have a whole discussion about what do we teach Christians. And basically, the main things that Peter and Paul agree on is you do not eat strangled animals, you do not eat blood, and you do not commit sexual immorality. And beyond that, we can talk, right? So, but eating eating blood, eating strangled animals, and sexual immorality are non-negotiable. It is most common. I'm not sure what you're talking about there. Probably Roman soldiers were getting in trouble since Christ's time. That is true. Josiah says, I've never had sex. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Sergeant Carter from Gomer Pyle versus Gunnery Sergeant Hartman. And I got to remember who Gunnery Sergeant Hartman is. Or gun, yeah. Oh, from Full Metal Jacket? Really? Although I will say this. Sergeant Carter from Gomer Pyle. Gomer Pyle was a complete doofus. Sergeant Carter was pretty serious. However, yeah, I'd definitely be, that would have to go to Sergeant Hartman. That Asian American actor just passed away a few days ago. He paid for the Bad Soul Wizard in the first. Yeah, the guy played Shang Tzu, along with 150 other roles. Yeah, I did hear about that. And so I saw someone posted, about his life, flawless victory. Right. I don't have time, and I'm trying to make money to be able. I don't have time, and I'm trying to make money to be able to go to church on Saturday. I'm not sure exactly what you mean there. Are you saying that's why you've never had sex, or are you saying that you're leaving? I'm not sure. The Handsome Jews, had some, but I don't believe them. Oh, jeez. I think it's okay to attend even if you can't donate. I think it's okay to attend even if you can't. I'm not sure what that is referring to. Going back to Josiah. Because you're trying to make money to go to church. I'm a little confused. Does your church require that you pay to go to church? Or did I miss something? Because if your church requires you to pay to attend services, you're going to the wrong church. Figure it's better to go and not to donate than to not go when you can't afford a donation. Well, I would say this, yeah. Okay, should you tithe as a biblical principle? You know, that's an open debate that some people have. Tithing is generally an Old Testament principle, not a New Testament principle. Now, in the New Testament, people give everything they have to the church is not uncommon, but it also depends on when the church has a need. So it says, like, if you look at the book of Acts, when we get to it, it's kind of interesting. But in the book of Acts, there are times when, okay, the church finds that some people have a need, and so they somebody sells some of their land, and then they give the money to the church so that the church can then use that money to help those that are needy. Let me turn this back on because Dupree is shivering again. So, and then there's a whole story about a couple that lied about how much they got so they could pocket some of the money, and God struck them dead, which is kind of interesting. But the point of that is that, okay, so tithing isn't necessarily a New Testament concept, but in the New Testament, if the church had a need, people would literally sell their property and give all the proceeds to the church. However, these were also people that didn't like go bankrupt doing that. So you can make an argument, make a debate based on, this line or that line from Scripture as to how much and when you should give to the church. I think tithing is a good place to start because tithing, on principle, is to give 10% of your income to the church. Now, does that mean you have to give 10% of the income to a specific church? No, you could spread it out to different churches. You could do like part of what I do is I give to our church, but I also give to a couple of online ministries from time to time. So, there's multiple ways that you can tithe. You also can, if you have no money to spare, like if you make $100 a week and your budget is $100 a week, so you have zero room to donate anything to church. Well, you know what? You can still find a way to donate some time. You could be an usher, or a parking lot attendant, or whatever they need, right? So but if the church has a mandatory policy towards tithing, there's a problem. And like there are churches that will, like, if you want to be a member, you sign a little agreement card saying, I will tithe, but it's not like that's legally binding or anything. Our church, our church teaches that tithing is a good thing to do. However, it's not considered a requirement unless you work for the church directly. Every person who is a staff member or elder of the church is required to tithe, and they are the only people that are checked upon. Other than that, like Corey points out many times from the pulpit, he has no idea who gives what to the church, and he doesn't want to know. The only people he knows give to the church are the people that work for him and the elders. The elders are unpaid. So, but they are required to tithe. Yeah, cover charge at a church. I don't get that. So I'm curious to see if he answers about that. And then Robert saying hi to Stan. Stan saying hi back to Robert. You can call me Stan. You can call me the street. Just don't call me late for dinner. Bump. And that sound means that the wife is coming home, just so you are aware. I work when my church is open on Saturdays. Okay. I'm not sure which. So what you're saying is you're trying to save up enough money so you can go to church, but you work when your church is open, so you can't go to church anyway. So maybe, you need to find a church that has services when you're not working. Can you not go to church on Sunday? Homelander versus Omni-Man. Oh, Omni-Man wins that hands down. Miss Work Shift. And let's see, Hannibal Lecter versus Ghostface. I mean, you would think Ghostface has got youth, not to mention the fact that there's multiple people on his side. But Hannibal Lecter is so ridiculously intelligent that he would probably get Ghostface to stab himself in the face. What if young Michael met his alternate self? You said something to make him so mad. What would he do? Probably not believe that it was an alternate version of me. The Bride from the Kill Bill movies versus Sonya Blade from Mortal Kombat. The Bride is cool, but Sonya Blade is supernatural, so I would have to give that to Sonya Blade. Michael Burnham versus the female Q. Depends on who's writing. If it's being written by Star Trek Discovery writers, Michael Burnham is the ultimate power in the universe. If it's being written by anybody sane, then obviously Q. Stargate, the movie Jack O'Neill versus SG-1 Jack O'Neill. I'm kind of partial to the original Jack O'Neill, to be honest. Because, come on. Homelander versus Fat Albert. I would probably give that one to Homelander because I don't think Fat Albert would have any defense against Homelander's heat vision, which is his go-to attack. At least I haven't watched all of The Boys, but, that seems to be like his usual way to dispatch people. Speaking of which, are you looking forward to the forthcoming new Stargate series coming to Amazon? I don't know yet. I don't know enough about it. We'll see. Unfortunately, this is something I was actually talking to Mr. Know-It-All about earlier, is that writing, particularly science fiction writing, seems to be more and more a lost art. And so I don't know if they're going to write a decent show. Let's see, Klingon Cleave Ship versus Borg Sphere or Klingon Cleave Ship versus Borg Cube. Oh, Klingon Cleave Ship would lose in either case. Especially, considering that's 23rd century tech. There's really nothing special about it as far as trying to take on something like the Borg. It's just very well designed to take on Federation starships. And Street Preacher said, no matter any defect, yeah. The line about men, and we already talked about that. All these seem like they would have. Let's see. All these seem like they would be obvious and easy to notice, and I can't help but wonder exactly what they meant by damaged testicles. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering about that myself. And that's us. Yes, I think some people were doing some horrible things or something. I don't know. Sergeant Fish from Barney Miller versus Ensign Tilly. Realistically, Sergeant Fish, but, I guess you would have to take their word for that one. Yep, both work fine. Yeah. Are they damaged? Let me see them. Come on. And that's what people really want. There are far better options than a short scene. There are far better options than a short scene in The Terminator. Oh, if that's what people really want, as far as the sexual stuff, yes. That's the funny thing is when you put that kind of thing in the middle of an R-rated movie, it's so out of place. Because look, if you're into watching that kind of thing, if you're not a Christian, hey, knock yourself out. If you are a Christian and you ask me about it, I'm going to tell you the truth. That's adultery of the heart. You shouldn't do it. But that's still between you and God, right? So, but as far as throwing it into a regular old movie, hey, you know what? If I want to watch that, I'll go put on, the Sperminator, which, by the way, is an actual movie. I remember the box for it. It had a guy that looked kind of like Arnold, and instead of "I'll be back," it had in the Terminator kind of font. It said "I'll come again." Except for in many horror movies, premarital sex, doing drugs, and drinking is necessary for the story. Except that in many horror movies, okay. Oh, so if you're talking about like, so you're defending the use of that in horror movies, in which case, I would agree to a point. It used to be back in the old days, if you had someone who was engaging in premarital sex, doing drugs, and drinking and stuff, then they were surefire victims of the killer. Nowadays, it doesn't really matter. And so I would say in modern horror, not so much, because in modern horror, it doesn't seem to be directly correlated between the odds of you being killed by the psycho. But in the old days, of course, you could always tell the one who's going to survive is the one who is virtuous. And that was part of the storytelling part. However, still didn't have to be extremely graphic, and most of the time it was. Like if you look at, say, the original Friday the 13th, Jason's mother went after camp counselors who were having premarital sex, but they didn't have like super duper graphic scenes. Not as graphic as the Terminator. The most graphic scene in that movie was probably the Kevin Bacon, and I don't remember the girl's name, but even that they didn't show as much as they do in the Terminator. And that scene made more sense in the context of the story. The cost of living here is so high that I live paycheck to paycheck, so I volunteer at a homeless shelter and planning on performing at nursing homes. Well, and that's the thing. If that's all you can do, I'd say, do what you can. Don't but don't overextend yourself. That's like when some people would apologize to me for not super chatting or something. I'd say, hey, if you can't afford to super chat, don't. you know and don't, not just to me, but don't super chat to anybody if you can't afford to. But and it's the same thing, like if you are literally like trying, and I know there what's his name, that stupid COVID guy, Kenneth Copeland. He actually said that if you have to make a choice between buying your prescriptions or donating to my ministry, you should donate to my ministry. That is sick and wrong. I can go to church on Sunday, so then go to church on Sunday. Is there any reason you're not? Well, it is when you're 13. What is? Oh, the sex. That's right. No superpowers. Batman. No superpowers. Batman versus Superman. Well, Batman, obviously. Superman is not a particularly skilled fighter in comparison to Batman. I mean, yes, later on, Superman became more skilled because he trained under Batman. But especially if you're looking at earlier days, Superman is not a particularly skilled fighter. He just depends on his incredible power. Likewise, though, even after being trained by Batman, he's not nearly as skilled as Batman. So, yeah, Batman's got all the skill. But we not know the ability of the 23rd century Borg. Perhaps not, but I would dare say that it is superior to 23rd century Starfleet / Klingons. Jester versus comedian. All right, Jester. I'm trying to remember who that is. Because comedian, I assume you're talking about the guy from The Watchmen. But Jester, I'm not. Okay, I think that. Oh, wait, I think I know who you're talking about now. Character from the Golden Age superhero. Let's see. The DC character. If you're talking about that character versus the comedian from The Watchmen, I would go with the comedian. Let's see. Someone 200, I assume that's supposed to be IQ, fought peak human master of martial arts versus Hannibal Lecter. Well, somebody has a 200 IQ, or or is IP something different? Because I know there's IP man, but anyway, peak master of martial arts versus Hannibal Lecter. Well, in the straight up fight, obviously the martial artist is going to win. But if you're talking about strategery, then Hannibal Lecter is pretty much unbeatable in that. The Borg versus the replicators from Stargate. That's an interesting, because the replicators of Stargate and Borg nanites in some have a lot in common. The real question, whenever you're talking about the Borg versus, the real question that you always simply have to ask is, can Borg nanites assimilate the biology and or technology of that species? And the replicators, I'm not 100% convinced that the Borg could, in fact, assimilate. So it would boil down to that. If the Borg could not, in fact, assimilate the replicators, then the replicators win. If the Borg can assimilate the replicators, then the Borg win. And that's kind of how the Borg operate. The only time the Borg ever found themselves threatened in the Star Trek universe was when they confronted a species they could not assimilate. And and since their weaponry was so powerful, they never really had a proper chance to adapt to it. Because notice that even like when you look at things like the transphasic torpedoes and a blade of armor and stuff from the Voyager finale, the Borg were in fact assimilating the information due to the sustained attacks. The fact that the Voyager was just getting swarmed with cube after cube after cube, and so even though the cubes were getting taken down in very short order, there was enough data being collected for them to adapt. However, when you look at 8472, their weaponry is so devastating and the conflict so one-sided that the Borg never have a sustained battle. The Borg are just, they show up and then they're dead. And so they never have a proper chance to assimilate any information. So I think that, but when it comes to the replicators versus the Borg, if assimilation is off the table, then it comes to a straight up fight, and I think that the replicators have a bit of an advantage there. Only projectile weapons were effective against the replicators. Yeah, that's true, and the Borg tend not to use them. They did use them in Descent, and I think they might have used them in like once or twice in Voyager. I was talking about a jester versus someone who does stand-up comedy. Oh, well, in that case, it would depend on the jester and the comedian, because I've seen some comedians that a good strong wind would knock them down, and I've seen some comedians that are completely jacked, so it just depends. Arabic says, I am amazed that the Borg assimilated a Medusan in Prodigy without going mad. Well, except that, like the reason that I'm not really that surprised by that, because in the Borg have especially in the Prodigy Borgs don't bring in the Queen, and so they're more like the classic collective. And in their collective state, the Borg are such a huge mind that to drive it insane due to shock, which is what happens with the Medusans, it would just there wouldn't be anything that could possibly shock a mind as large as the entire collective. And that's something that I think is kind of interesting, because the psychology of the Borg, it's really too bad that they introduced the Queen, because prior to the introduction of the Queen, the Borg were, I think, the scariest villain in Star Trek. after the introduction of the Queen, they just became zombies. What is the most scariest thing you've seen? Well, I mean, I don't know. Are you talking about in real life, or are you talking about like in a movie or TV show? I don't know. I mean, there's very few movies and or TV shows that I would ever say were scary. There are things that I think are disturbing that you might think about afterwards, like, ew, that's really creepy or something. But as far as something that like, I'm scared, and I can't really think of anything. But in real life, I've seen a couple of things that I would rather forget, so I'm not going to talk about here. But that was a long time ago. Fortunately, it was something that I saw when I was in the military. I'll just say that much. Let's see. And it wasn't like a combat zone or something, but it was something I saw when I was in the military. What would happen if Borg assimilated a Q? Then the Borg would have a singular member of the collective that had the power of a Q. And the interesting thing about that is that how much of the Q's power is innate and how much is technological. We've still never really 100% clear on that. We do know that they use both technology and they have some innate abilities. So, but how far their innate abilities go, we don't really know. But the interesting thing is that if they assimilated a Q, they would have all the knowledge of that Q, which means they would probably have the ability to start creating Q level technology, which would be really bad news for everybody everywhere. Because remember, the Q using their handheld weapons were causing supernovas. And so imagine if the Borg could equip their cubes with weapons that can just trigger a supernova. That would be bad. Let's see. I would love to see more of the conspiracy bug aliens. I would have too. I wish they had followed up on that. Josiah saying, bye, have a good one. We do not know if the Borg can assimilate a Q. Technically, we don't know that if they could, except that it would appear that the Q do have a natural humanoid state. And part of the argument that I would make for that is when we look at, I can't remember the name of the episode now, but the one where Q shows up on DS9, and Cisco punches Q in the face. Now, if Q were truly this omnipotent super being, blah, 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 then Cisco punching him in the face would have done absolutely nothing. But it actually did knock Q on his butt, and it looked like it actually hurt him. And further, Q showed apprehension about being hit with a phaser the first time we see him in Encounter at Farpoint. So it would seem that the Q are vulnerable to the same things that any humanoid would be if you can get to them. Further, now we do know it's canonized now, thanks to Strange New Worlds, that Trelane is in fact a Q. And Kirk took a swing at a Q with a sword, and Trelane, teleported away from it rather than just letting him hit him. So that would indicate that if he had in fact hit him, that would have been a problem. And again, when Kirk slaps Trelane in the face, he seems to actually feel that. So yeah, I think that I think that that's strong indicators that the nanites could in fact assimilate biologically a Q. The trick would be to get close enough to him to inject him. The Borg versus the Doctor. Well, The only reason the doctor is successful is because he's got ridiculous plot armor. So if you took away the doctor's plot armor, the Borg win instantaneously. Q warned Junior not to provoke them. That is true. And that's another thing that I would use as evidence that the Borg could assimilate a Q. I'm done work. On average, it's a good job, but yesterday was 3 hours and today it's 11 hours. Not sure average. It's a good way to assess this. I'm not sure average is a good way to assess this. Yeah. It sucks when your work is so inconsistent like that. Believe me, I understand that. And so, speaking of inconsistent, that's why I want to try to experiment with doing morning shows. I might try that next week. We'll see how that goes. But I have an idea of what I want to do there. But in the meantime, guys, take care. God bless. And hopefully, we're going to do a live stream on Friday.